Hey, Gen X crew, it's Lynn,
Hi, I'm Jace.
and welcome to our channel, Gen
Gen
X
X
Quench.
Quench.
And on this channel, we talk about all things related to people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond from the standpoint of pre retirement. Now, we spend a lot of time talking about travel and living abroad and finances, but we also are very much interested in leaving a legacy and family. And that is going to be the topic of our conversation today. So, we have a very special guest with us today. We are honored to have a very dear friend of ours and Jice's fraternity brother, Walter Pryor, a first time author who wrote a fantastic book. This Leaves Me Okay, Race, Legacy, and Letters from My Grandmother. So, for those of you all that maybe want to write a book someday, please listen in. For those of you all who are really enamored and in love with your family and your family history and you want to capture it, this video is for you. You know, a lot of us are in this sandwich generation where we are taking care of our parents and taking care of our kids and possibly even grandkids. And, you know, these stories that our parents and foreparents had, you know, we want to capture them. A lot of us do because we don't want them passing away with them. And that is something that Walter has spent time and has documented. And we really want to share that process with you. So, with that, you will find out more about Walter. We won't go through some formal bio. This is going to be a casual conversation, but we'll let Walter introduce himself. But we're going to kick it off with really the first question that for those of you all who haven't read, This Leaves Me Okay, and we will have a link in the description. So please click on that link and purchase this book as soon as our video is over. Can you give us this elevator pitch? What is the heart of this book? What is this book about?
Well, first of all, let me say to you, Lynn and Jice, thanks so much for having me on your program. I'm really honored to be here and so
Thank you.
excited when you guys started this and never thought I'd be a guest. So thank you, first and foremost. In terms of the book, I started the book really as a way to honor my grandmother's life. My grandmother was born in 1915, so basically 50 years after the end of slavery, was a maid most of my life, only had an eighth grade education, and yet she wrote me letters almost weekly for not quite 30 years.
Mhm.
And although I didn't have the presence of mind to save the letters as a small child, for some reason, when I was in law school, I started sticking her letters in my desk drawer. And so by the time I graduated, I had roughly, I don't know, 3 dozen or so of her letters, maybe a few more. And to have them in together in my hand felt like something important, like something I couldn't throw away. And so that alone was rather significant to me that, she wasn't a well-educated woman and she decided she was going to write letters. But then after she died, I learned a lot more about her life. And even though I had known some of the struggles of her life, I learned more afterwards. And it just set me on this quest to try to figure out how my grandmother, who had survived all these traumas, could be the person who I knew, who, if you didn't know otherwise, you would think she never had a problem in her life because she was always so positive, so full of energy, so full of life. And that is what really set me on the quest of writing the book. Now, I will also say very early on, when I graduated from law school, I had this set of letters. My wife, Juliet, said, "You should write a book."
Mm.
And I said, "Juliet, I'm not writing a book." And that happened, many, many times over the course of several years because I just have such a great respect for great writing. I love great books. And I didn't see myself on that level. And I really didn't want to write something that, was going to be a piece of crap. So I just resisted it. And finally, between Juliet's persistence and, my inquiry and, perplexing around how my grandmother came to be. And I was ending a corporate role right at the start of COVID. So I was having a bit more time. I said, you know what? I'm just going to try it.
Okay.
What the heck? Try it. And I
Right.
did.
Mhm.
And I was very, nervous and apprehensive about it, but I'm very glad that I took the step.
Very good.
Mhm.
Thanks for sharing. So, your grandmother Mama Ceal wrote you for 30 years. Wow, sound like weekly. So from boyhood until she passed away. When did you realize those letters were something the world needed to hear about?
Well, it's an interesting question. I don't even know that I had this sense that they were something that the world needed to know, right? I
Okay.
I did feel it was something special that she wrote me so regularly because I didn't know many people who got letters that regularly from someone in their family.
Right.
And as I said in the book, it they started before I could read. And so one of
Mhm.
my earliest memories is my mother reading a letter to my sister and me that my grandmother had sent. And I don't know where I got this idea, but I had just determined you had to be important to get mail, right? And here I was getting
Okay.
Right,
mail
Yep.
from
right.
my grandmother. And so all through my life, the fact that I almost could take this for granted that I was going to get mail, I think really fed into my self-esteem and my self-worth and really feeling like I mattered in spite of all the, you know, counter programming that's out there,
Right.
particularly for children of color in this country.
Mhm.
But after I had, had this collection of letters, I wanted to pay tribute to her, and I didn't have a sense that there was a larger message really for anyone beyond documenting my grandmother's life, having it for our family, and maybe, having a few friends who would be supportive and purchase the book. So
Mhm.
Mhm.
I'm thrilled that the letters have taken on this kind of importance and significance for people that I really hadn't imagined. I actually did an event last night in Connecticut, and a woman came up to me almost in tears and she said, I saw the letters that you actually have in the book. She said, and it was like looking at my mother's letters. She said, the
Oh, wow.
handwriting, the grammar, all of it. She said, it just kind of took me back and it was so significant. I can't believe that, our stories are so aligned. And my sense is, you know, beyond the fact that this is obviously a story of a Black family in this country, I
Mhm.
think, it resonates across race, across, ethnicities, from the standpoint that almost every family has people who want the generations behind them to do better, and they're willing to make sacrifices for them. And that's a
Mhm.
lot of what's captured in the story and what I think the letters represent.
Right. I mean, your grandmother was in, you're from Arkansas, but when
Right.
I was reading the book, my grandmother's from Alabama. And just like that, it was like, wow, the handwriting. And my grandmother was born in 1918. And it's like, okay, there's similarities with, my grandmother, her daughter is my mother, and just sort of the things as far as like some of the relationship between the grandmother and the mother and me, all of those types of things. So I think that it definitely is a book that those of us from this age group who have probably grandparents that were born in the teens, and probably a vast majority from the South, American South, you can relate to it. You definitely
Yeah.
can relate to it. And it also just holds a mirror up to ourselves as far as it's like, okay, I didn't go through what they went through, but, they were climbing the mountain and we climbing a mountain now too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny that you say that because as the book is structured, it's basically a narrative about her life that, brings in my mother and then me. But I wrote the book through a workshop because when I started writing, I really had no clue about how to write a book.
Mhm.
And my first attempts at getting things on paper, I probably had 5 pages that told the whole story of my grandmother's life. And I'm like, okay, now what? How does this become a book? And a friend of mine who was a writer said, I know exactly what you need to do. I've written all of my books and workshops. Let me connect you to my friend who runs these workshops. And the way that operates, or this particular one operates, we would submit 10 to 15 pages each week. I was in a group with 4 other writers, wildly talented people who were writing very different, each a very different kind of work, which was great for me. But we
Mhm.
would comment on each other's writing. And then the workshop leader would give, his comments around how to revise. Sometimes it was great. Sometimes like you keep resubmitting several times to get it to where you want it. Um, and so the writing of the book was this kind of odd, experience for me to really be treated as a writer as I came into the workshop and then to see the book kind of coming together. But there
Mhm.
were times when I really could not write. I would just hit these blocks and we'd end up talking about things that happened in the story. And
Mhm.
for one of the first conversations, and I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but I'll get to a point in just a moment. One of the first conversations was about colorism, where I talk about my grandmother and her sister cousin and their difference in complexions and how they were treated. And we started talking, and some of the white people in the group said, "Oh my gosh, is that really a thing?" And the black people were like, "Oh yeah, it's
Oh
a
yeah.
thing, and it still happens." And so they said, "Well, you should write about that." Well, I started writing it as an article that might be a way to promote the book when it finally came out. And then as we continued in the workshop, there were these other issues that came up, and it was almost like this conversation between our lives, right? So colorism is one, code switching is another, you know, how you adapt to racism, how she had to do it, how I had to do it. And those articles that were gonna, you know, kind of advertise the book actually became part of the book, in many ways. And so it ties our lives together in ways that you would not ordinarily think. You would think somebody born in 1915 compared to somebody born in 1965 would have vastly different lives. And yes, around technology and infrastructure and those kind of things, yes, it's very different. But it's interesting that some of the challenges my grandmother faced, I still faced, my children still face.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Universal.
Yep.
Universal. So is there a passage from the book of one of her letters early in the book, or something that captures the voice or the essence of the relationship that you can share to give us a taste?
Sure. It's not early in the book, but it's later. But I thought it was one of the best letters to that captures her voice. And this is actually towards the end of the book, where, well, just as by way of background, the book is a memoir, but also a work of creative nonfiction, meaning there are places where I have to create scenes to illustrate things that I knew happened. I wasn't there. The people who were there weren't still here, even though we knew it happened, had records of all the details, but not specific conversations. And so I created it. But what I love about this chapter that has this letter, it's predominantly letters that my grandmother sent me leading up to my law school graduation. So as opposed to me trying to recreate her excitement or what's happening with her, she pretty much tells us through her letters what she's thinking. And so this is one of those letters that she wrote me just before graduation. Dear Walter, well, it were a big surprise to get a sweet letter from you. So glad you is doing okay. Well, I don't know if anything will become of it, but one of Miss Della's friends were out here to see Miss Della. She wanted the school that you is in, so I gave her the envelope that you sent me. She wanted to send it to her granddaughter. Oh, yes, will you please make some time for us to go see Mr. and Mrs. Horton just for a visit? Because I don't want to miss anything, smile. I'm so proud of you. Also, one of Mr. Eugene's cousins were out here. He say, I hear your grandson is finishing law school. He say, I am proud for him, and I know you is, and I am proud for you too. Also, give Juliet my love. Also, in Shaw, tell all of them to say a little prayer for me. I'm glad you had a happy Easter. You be good and remember me in your prayers. Love, Mama C.
That's wonderful.
And I love the way the letters, it's like her version of English. I mean, you said with the limited education and working as a maid, you left it unfiltered. And
I thought
and
it
you
was really
had to, like, you
important.
printed the letter. I mean, the image of the letter. And I was like, when I first started reading, I was like, I'm not sure what Mama Ceal is saying. And then you read and it's like, okay, this is what it is as far as like.
So I because I had the letters, I just felt there was something, you know, really emotional about actually seeing her handwriting. But I also recognized there were times where it was hard for me to read. And so I transcribed it, but I did exactly what you said. I tried to do it exactly as she wrote it with very little editing on my part, because I wanted to capture not only her voice, but a reflection of, you know, her level of education and how she was, you know, trying to get through communicating, even if she didn't have all the formal tools.
Right. Yeah. And I love the way that she talks about the people locally, which I'm sure you know, but it was like, okay, yeah, that's what my grandmother would tell me all about. Aunt Ella stopped by the house today. I'm like, is that really matter? But okay, hi, Aunt Ella, you know, that type of thing. As far as whatever was going on in her world, she put that in the letter.
That's exactly right. And that's the really one of important things, because so many people go, oh, well, gosh, you have these letters. What kind of advice did she give you? And the letters really don't have much advice beyond telling me to be a good boy, remember to pray, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise she's just kind of connecting. It's just a way of expressing her love, which is really sweet in and of itself. But
Mhm.
I think the lessons that she imparted really were more through how she lived her life as opposed to what she captured in her letters.
Right. Right.
I see some Willie Mae and Mama Ceal, my great grandmother,
Uh-huh.
who I would spend summers with in Punta Gorda, Florida. And I like the cover of your book too, because it's got the quilt on it.
Hmm.
I'm looking at my great grandmother's quilt that she gave me right before I went to start working in Detroit, Michigan. And Lynn has stolen it now. Like I don't get to use it, but it's kind of her quilt now. But
Mhm.
I remember that last act of love because she was in the hospital and I think she died a
Hmm.
week later after I left
Oh,
for
wow.
Detroit. But her last gift to me was, here, you're gonna need this quilt. I made it for you. You're gonna be cold in Detroit. And I was like, man, just hearing and kind of reading a little bit about the book.
It's the
Yeah, you
connection.
can I can relate to something in the book. And
Right.
she had a sixth
So
grade education.
beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So let's get transition to our next question. So you're currently an executive on many boards, husband, father, etc., community service. So how did you find time to actually write in the book, and what did your schedule look like to do this over?
And when did you start? Because
Yeah,
the
when
book
did you
was
start?
published in May of 2025 of this year.
Yes.
So what was kind of like day one, month one of since you've had these letters all your life?
Yes. So day one, month one was February of 2020. And we were
Mm,
just, starting to figure out something was happening that became
Mhm.
COVID.
right.
And just a few months before, the company I had been with at the time, had hit a financial downturn. I was going to a part-time status. And so I had a little more time.
Mhm.
Okay.
And I thought, well, if I have this time, I should use it. And so when I first started the book, I had quite a bit of time, but I wasn't writing regularly and I couldn't figure out how to do the schedule. And so I was haphazardly writing from basically about February until about August. In August is when I joined the workshop. And
Okay.
that's when I started writing consistently. Now, mind you, 4 months later, I started a new role as an interim general counsel. And so I was back in the fray of a full-time job, also trying to write. But because I needed those 10 to 15 pages each week to submit, I was
Mhm.
writing in the evening, oftentimes on the weekends, not both Saturday and Sunday, but at least one of those days I was trying to devote to writing because I needed to have my 10 pages. Now, that's
Mhm.
not to say that every single week I turned in 10 pages because sometimes I didn't, but
Okay.
I religiously attended workshop because I wanted to hear the critique of my fellow writers. I wanted to benefit from their writing and to learn and grow in that way. But all in all, it was basically a 5-year, 3-month process from first word to published book.
Wow.
Wow. And at what point did you finish the manuscript from the standpoint of getting to the publishing and all of that?
So I was probably finished in about 3 years, maybe a little over 3 years. And I was anxious to get it published right away.
Hmm.
And it took a while to find a publisher. And I
Hmm.
was very frustrated that it was taking so long. And then after we got a publisher, we had to go through the editing process, and that took several months. And it was, several rounds of editing, also very frustrating. And I'm just sitting there, like biting a hole in my jaw because I want the book out.
Right.
Mhm.
And yet, it's so interesting. The book has come out when it was supposed to come out. I mean, I feel like it was God ordained because as we were getting ready to publish, the publisher's like, oh my God, I can't believe, this is so relevant. She said, particularly now that we're in this climate of almost a hostility
Right.
towards
Mhm.
history, acknowledging contributions of Black Americans in this country, uh, acknowledging our contributions, all of it. And so it's really funny that it's coming out now. And I think that gives it an added, point of connection and relevance to people
Mhm.
because I said this the other night. It's not up to the federal government. It's not up to state government. It's not even up to local school boards to value and cherish our history.
Mm.
And I say that as an African American in this country, but I think it's true for every family of any persuasion. Your family history is your treasure, and it's up to you to preserve it, to acknowledge it, to celebrate it, and to make sure that your children and your family members know it and that they carry it forward. And so I think the climate certainly helps, bring home that message, but hopefully beyond even just African American people who are feeling challenged at this point, all people will recognize that in their family there is one, two, several people who made pivotal decisions that
Right.
impacted the path and the direction that your family took. And it's
Mhm.
so important to recognize and celebrate that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we know that Juliet supported this, your wife supported the
Yes.
project. And were there other family members? Did you have the support of other family members? Did you let people know that you were writing, or did you kind of keep it close?
So one, I absolutely had the support of Juliet, and if you read the dedication, I basically dedicated to Juliet, my wife, who spoke it into existence when I wasn't even willing to consider it, and my children, who were so completely supportive along the way. And I'll give you an example. After the book was done, and you're trying to get readers to do it, and you're trying to get blurbs for the cover and to whatever to help promote it, and two friends who just happen to be friends of the family, Eric Holder, Stacey Abrams. I had sent it to them, and they both said, "Oh, sure, we'll do blurbs." And so I'm coming back. I'm like, guys, in the family group chat, Eric said yes. Stacey said yes. They're doing. They think the book is great. And my son goes, "Dad, you're the only one who's surprised. We've always known this was going to be great." And so that just typifies the kind of support that I had. My mother and sister were both very supportive. Although I laughed because anytime my mother thought I was interviewing for her for the book, she couldn't remember a thing. She'd just clam up and couldn't remember a thing. But if I happen to say, "Oh, do you remember when Mama Ceal used to do so and so, and she told us about blah blah blah," and we were just having a conversation, it would just flow. And so I'd have to be, really remembering, because I couldn't be writing it down. I couldn't let her know that I was taking notes. But she was very helpful all along the way. And then I had, just groups of friends who knew I was writing. And for me, I know a lot of people say, "Don't tell everybody what you're doing and keep it a secret." I knew I had to tell people because it was the only way that was going to hold me accountable. If I only knew, then I might stop and then just let it go and nobody would ever know. But if I told people, they're gonna like, "Hey, how's the writing going? What have you done? Are you still writing? How's it going?" And I needed that just kind of occasional push to keep going at times when I was like not really sure of the writing or not thinking it was very good.
Right. And I think that's a little pin and a postscript to our viewers, is that there's something that you want to do and you're keeping it close, but here's the advice: tell somebody, get accountability partners and people to push, because it's not too late, but we're not getting any younger,
Right.
that type of thing. So I think that that's a key message as far as sharing it with people that you trust and support, for them to
Absolutely.
give you that extra push and support, because I would imagine there were some times that you might have felt like giving up or putting it to the side. What were those, what kept it going? Was it the family and the friends?
Well, absolutely it was. And so the really interesting thing, and I laugh because the workshop leader would say, "We don't know if we're going to publish it or not, but let's just keep writing." And I'm like, in my head, I'm going, "No, I'm publishing," right? Because we weren't really sure
Right.
what form it was going to take. I
Mhm.
didn't have enough direct source people, uh, source material, and people to talk to get direct
Right.
information. And so it couldn't be technically a true memoir, right?
Mhm.
And I resisted this idea of making it a novel because there was so much about it that was true that I didn't want to trivialize it and people just think it was this made up story.
Right.
So
Okay.
the format of the book is, as I mentioned earlier, it is a memoir, but it's also a work of creative nonfiction that's also sprinkled with these kind of essays that tie together, my grandmother to my mother to me to my children.
Mhm.
And so it's a very unique, well, we think unique format for a book in some ways.
Mhm.
And so there were points in time where my workshop leaders, "Well, I don't know, maybe we will, maybe we won't." And so when I finished it and he said, you know, I really like this.
Yeah.
If you want, I'll represent you. I'm like, oh, heck yeah. If you, who weren't sure we're going to publish it, is now
Right.
embracing it and saying it's great, then absolutely, you'll be the best person to help me sell it to a publisher.
Okay.
That's great. That's great.
So next question, for someone who might be thinking, hey, my life's not interesting enough, or my family's life isn't interesting enough, what would you do to encourage those folks? And especially from the perspective of underrepresented community as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say that part of my hesitation revolved around that same thought. Like it's just my grandmother. It's just my grandmother and you know, stuff that happened with my grandmother and my mother. And I kind of trivialized the story as opposed to stepping back and recognizing that there were really pivotal moments in our family's life that my grandmother made a decision that impacted us. I mean, the one of the central themes in the book, and I don't think I'm giving anything away, my grandmother decided that she needed to send my mother away to live with relatives so that she could go to the best Negro high school in the area so that she had a chance to go to college. And she was very clear that was not going to happen if my mother went to school out in the country where they lived. And that created all kinds of issues for them. My mother always felt given away. My grandmother always worried, did my mother love this other woman who was raising her more than her? And they never really resolved that in many respects. But if you ask my mother, she would say, I probably would not have gone to college had I stayed in the country and gone to school, because a lot of her friends who were there did not. And so that's just one example of a type of decision that impacts how a family's life evolves. And I'm certain in every family, every single family has one, two, three, a few people who have made these decisions that really influence you being where you are now. And I think those stories are important. I don't think they should be trivialized. I don't think they should be dismissed. And even if they don't rise to the level of writing a full book, it's still history that's worth celebrating. It's history that should be told within your families and carried forward.
And that's the part that I love about this and this discussion and encouraging other people of our age group is to capture these historic moments because my mom is 90 and lives with us. And I am trying to capture stories and asking her things. And we have like a family tree that's written and, you know, all of these type things. But I'm realizing, you know, increasingly that a lot of the generations before her, you know, we don't know those stories. We don't know a lot of those things. And like you said, you grew up with them, or if you do know them, you just kind of take it for granted. But in reading yours, I was like, oh, well, there's parts of that story that's similar to me. And, you know, by reading it, it's like you want to find out more about other people's stories and that type of thing. So I think that there is something to be shared about, oh, my story is not that important. It was like, well, it is to you and yours, but it also is meaningful to other people who share the same kind of, you know, environment and growing up and all of that, that we just need to capture. And now more than ever, support our stories, support our history, because yeah, I mean, the world and the country is doing enough to erase the big historic stories, but we do need to talk about how our grandparents cleaned the houses of white people. You know, I mean, that's a universal, your great grandmother, both of my grandmothers, that was how they made their money. And they would go to church on Sunday and pray to that God that their children and grandchildren would have a better life.
Well, now
So you know what's interesting? One of the things that I learned to that specific point in the 1940s and 50s, of the Black women who were employed, the vast majority of the percentage of women who were employed as domestics. And so even if it wasn't your grandmother, it may have been a great grandmother, or it may have been a cousin or an aunt or something. So if you are African American in this country, you have some tie
Right.
in many ways to someone who was a domestic, oftentimes, not universally, but often. The other piece that I think that is tied to what you just said in terms of being in this kind of sandwich generation. I think Generation X, we have this unique ability that we're the last kind of generation tied to the civil rights movement directly,
Mhm.
but also tied to this now future of AI and people moving forward. And I think we're in a really unique position to kind of bring those together or connect them. And if we don't do it, I think it will be lost.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I mean, what I also like is in these stories, these family stories, you get, I don't know, the history of how to overcome and make do with what you have. And to your point, Walter, making decisions that impact future generations for the better. So I think everybody can relate to that. Everyone wants their future generation to do better than what they're currently doing. Uh,
Right.
so
Right.
there's history in that. Learn the lessons from other people, and hopefully it'll better the future generation.
Right. And a sense of universal pride.
Yeah, universal.
You know, that's the thing as far as that resilience is, you know, it crosses all of our DNA. Just from the
Yes.
standpoint as far as like, okay, well, you know, I read the book and I was encouraged to have, you know, to keep going. You know, it was like almost, I mean, Mama Ceal was writing these letters to you, but now you've shared them. So now she's writing them to us. And I heard, you know, she proud of you. Well, she probably proud of me too, you know, that type of thing.
Exactly. Well, you know, the interesting piece about this, and again, that whole dynamic crosses racial, ethnic, generational lines. I sit on a board with a number of people, but the 70-year-old white man had taken an interest in it. And so I sent him the first chapter, the early version of the first chapter. And he wrote me back this long, amazing email talking about his German grandmother who spoke very little English and wasn't sure she could read, and the parallels between her desire to do right by her family and my grandmother's desire, and how he was so struck by the images in the first chapter that he really wanted to know what happened to these two little girls who were running along the fence with the dogs, and how that, you know, also reminded him of the poverty that, you know, his family experienced in the early days of their family. And so there are multiple layers in which this, I think this story can resonate with people.
Right.
And I love the fact that it's one that, you know, can speak to all kinds of people, all kinds of ethnicities and backgrounds.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, let's put a pin and have another, you have another passage that was emotionally significant for you to write or that resonated with people. Share a little bit more of This Leaves Me Okay.
So what I won't read this passage, but I'll explain it to you because
Okay.
it's a little long, and I really I I hesitate to read that particular one in bits and pieces because I feel like it needs to flow together. But there was one passage that I started, and I told you there were sections where I'd have trouble writing. This passage, for some reason, I had no trouble writing at all, and I almost felt like, you know, God was directing it and Mama Seal was hovering around me, right? But the scene is her coming back to her room one Sunday evening and she's working on a quilt. And so I'm imagining her, and I have you mentioned that the cover of the book is a quilt. It's a quilt that she made. She made it when our daughter was born. But the pattern that she did was an old pattern that she had done several times before. So I'm imagining her in her room, working on this quilt. She's by herself because her daughter is living with someone else. She's turned on the radio to listen to music, and Precious Lord Take My Hand comes on the radio. This is in my imagination.
Okay.
And my first thought is, oh my gosh, Precious Lord, you've rarely gone to a funeral. At least there was a period of time where they didn't play Precious Lord. So I'm imagining her thinking about her husband's, my grandfather's funeral. She's working on the quilt. She's imagining her life. The song is playing and it's kind of floating in and out of her consciousness. And so I'm writing this passage as her thinking about her life, but also letting the words of the song filter in here and there and acknowledging her pain and the blues of it, but also the resilience of getting through this and completing the quilt and just kind of ending on this very, maybe not completely upbeat, but a positive outlook for herself. And
Right.
so for me, that section is very emotional because I almost feel like I'm sitting there with her as she's doing it. The
Mm-hmm.
really interesting thing is I've probably read through the book, I don't know how many times. I still, every now and then, if I get on a plane, I may pull it up and just randomly pull a chapter just to familiarize myself with it. But if I'm reading it in my head silently, I'll hit a passage and I'll go, oh, that's kind of emotional. That's kind of sentimental. If I'm reading it out loud, there's something about saying it out loud that makes it even more real. And I choke myself up. I make myself almost cry just reading some of these passages. And that passage, that chapter, which is chapter 17, is one of those really strong, emotionally wrenching chapters for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yep.
Well, next question, Walter. Now, you've mentioned before that if you could write Mama Ceal a letter now, you would tell her that she is your hero and that your success is directly tied to hers. What else would you tell her about your life, what's going on now? What would you tell her?
I I would just thank her for having the courage to make the decision that she made.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't have a model for sending a child to college. She just knew that's what she wanted to do.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think ultimately, at least when she made the decision, I think over the course of that time, I think she came to know, other cousins or other relatives who had gone to college. And so I think that bolstered her decision. But the
Mm-hmm.
point at which she decided to send my mother away, I don't think she had a model.
Mm-hmm.
And the courage that it took to do that, which just by way of background, in writing the book, and I had never realized this before, my grandparents had my mother 6 or 7 years into their marriage. Now, if you
Mm-hmm.
think about the timing of this, these were not people who were planning pregnancies,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
which means my grandmother probably lost a number of pregnancies over those 6 or 7 years. Either she lost them or she couldn't get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
So they had been waiting for a child for a long time.
Right.
They
Hmm.
finally get this child that they had, desired and prayed for. And at some point they realize we cannot keep her with us and
Mm-hmm.
do right by her.
Mm-hmm.
We have to send her away so that
Mm-hmm.
she has a better life and so that she can do better than us. And so I realized I didn't have that kind of fortitude. Like our daughter, when we were moving, we moved from DC to Chicago. She was going into the 11th grade. And for a while we debated, should we let her stay in DC
You
with
see.
some really close friends because this is going to be so disruptive to
Right.
her high school, and it's going to be hard. And it was hard and it was disruptive. But our foursome, my wife, my daughter, and our son, is so close that we're like, no, we can't do it. We're just gonna have
Mm-hmm.
to
Okay.
tough it out. And we're gonna figure it out. I extrapolate from that or try to imagine my grandmother doing the same thing. And it was even much harder for her because they were only 15 miles apart, but it might as well have been 100 miles because they couldn't immediately go back and forth. They didn't have cell phones. They didn't have email. They didn't have
Right.
ways of constantly
Yeah.
being in touch the way we at least do now.
Right.
And so the significance of her decision is just so amazing to me. And so
Mm-hmm.
I would, in some ways, I would try to communicate to her how absolutely wonderful that was. And to say, the decision that you made to send your child away has resulted in your great grandson graduating from Harvard, or your
Right.
great granddaughter being a second generation lawyer now,
Right.
right? That's
Right.
because you did what you did.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Very good.
that would be great. So after writing the book, have you had family members, people from Arkansas reach out? Any surprises there? Because I know that for anybody thinking about their family history and wanting to document it, all of it may not be positive. All of it, if how do you tell the stories and be authentic to the stories, but maybe it doesn't show everybody in the positive light. So if you can speak on both sides of that, as far as any surprises on people that reached out after reading the book that were in the family or connected some kind of way, and what advice do you have people if people are hesitant about telling that story because they're like,
Yeah.
ooh, great Uncle Joe may not be happy with me if I, let this out.
Yeah. Well, I don't know in terms of, well, let me say this. I had a number of people who've reached out to say, "Oh, your grandmother wrote me as well. I didn't keep her letters, but she always wrote me, and I was always happy to get a letter from her." Or I had one friend, again, this was part of the group of friends who knew I was writing. I actually read the passage that I referenced, chapter 17. I didn't know it was chapter 17 at the time, but I read it and I looked up and I finished reading, and he's sitting right next to me to my left, and he's got tears in his eyes. And he said, "You have to keep writing."
Mhm.
And I'm like, I'm kind of taken aback. I'm like, "What are you talking?" He's like, "You have to keep writing." He said, "You're telling your story, but you're telling our story too. It's so
Right.
important."
Right.
Right.
And I was just like, I think that was the first time that I had any sense of this story really resonating with other people. I mean, I felt like it was an interesting story, and people might, you know, be intrigued by it, but that it could represent more than just me was really significant.
Hmm.
Now, in terms of writing, I think I don't know if I entered some kind of zone or what, but I don't think I was as conscious of how it might cast people in a poor light. Now, I was very clear in wanting to be accurate and tell the truth.
Hmm.
Right.
And I very strongly did not want to create the character, well, not character, my great aunt cousin, Momo. I didn't
Hmm.
want to cast her as a villain, even though she was a very strict disciplinarian who made my mother's growing up life very challenging.
Uh-huh.
Um,
It comes across.
yeah, well, right.
Yeah.
But I also hope what comes across is it was motivated by her love for her,
Right.
that
Right.
Right.
she wanted to prepare this child and not send her out in the world, you know, unable to function.
Right. Any
She
kind of
also
way.
was of this
Exactly.
mindset that, I'd rather correct you at home than have somebody else correct you in the streets.
Right.
And
Right.
so my hope was that it was balanced, but I don't know that I was always aware of it. Like I even had someone say, "I feel like I know you so much better now." And I started thinking, well, what did I say? How transparent was I?
Right.
And I guess I was in many respects, but I'm so glad I wasn't aware of it because
Hmm.
I think it might have inhibited me really telling the story. Now, there was one point, I mean, I say in the book, my parents weren't married when my mother, when my sister and I were born.
Hmm.
And that I had a little hesitation about, but I'm like, it's the
It's
truth,
the
and there's
truth.
not anything that can be done about it.
Right.
And I was kind of holding my breath a little bit when my mother was reading because I wasn't sure if she would be concerned about that. And it turned out my sister was more concerned about it than my mother was. But I was like, if my mother is fine with it, then I'm fine with it, and we're going with it, right?
Right. Right.
So I think that I think there has to be a real emotional honesty and an integrity about writing. I don't think you can rewrite history and
Hmm.
write a true story, an authentic story of your family. I
Hmm.
think you do them a disservice because you paint them one dimensionally and not all the complexities of people. And I think it makes for a less interesting story. I think, if one person is completely perfect all the time, that's just kind of boring. You
Right.
know,
Right.
you
Right.
want there to be wrinkles and idiosyncrasies and things that don't make sense or things that upset you. And
Right.
because that's how we all are, and that's the truth, and I think the relatability of the story for people.
Right. And that's what family is about. I mean,
It's
everybody,
messy.
right. It's messy, but it's yours and you love them. And it also helps to get some of their motivation as far as like, well, the more when you shape it and you share it, it's like, well, that's why they're that way. But we all can relate to Uncle Joe and Aunt
Yes,
Sarah and that
exactly.
type of thing because in a sense everybody's different but there still are archetypes in these families that
Yes,
you can recognize and you're not trying to be malicious, you are trying to accurately depict the family.
right,
Hmm.
exactly.
All right. Well, what life lessons or wisdom from Mama Seal's journey do you hope to pass on to Gen X? And what do you think they can get from this legacy?
More than anything, I think it's this ability to stay hopeful in the face of what seemed like insurmountable obstacles. I
Hmm.
mean, she wanted to send a child to college, even though she didn't even complete high school. And
Mhm.
yet she believed she could do that, right? She never knew that there would be a Black president.
Right.
She didn't, she did see the civil rights movement, but there are so many things that have happened that she couldn't have imagined, right?
Mhm.
And yet she pushed through. And in some ways, maybe it's harder for us because we've seen a Black president and we've seen the gains from a civil rights movement, and to see the threat of that being turned around is
Right.
disheartening.
Right.
But if people like my grandmother can go through the periods of time without technological advancements and resources and produce the kind of results that she did, then there's no excuse for us not doing the same.
Right.
We have all kinds of technologies, all kinds of ways to connect, all kinds of ways to leverage the resources that we do have. And there's no reason that we cannot make this into the world that we want it to be. I mean, I truly believe that there are more people who support progress, who support diversity and inclusion than the loudest voices that we're hearing right now.
Right.
And it may take a few very difficult years for us all to come together and push back and make that happen. But I do believe it will.
Right.
Very good.
The resilience of us. So if someone's watching and they want to start documenting their story today, what are the first steps that you would recommend that they do?
I think I would say get a journal. Get a journal and just start jotting down ideas and thoughts and memories. Everything that you can remember, put it down. It doesn't have to be chronological. You can go back and organize it later.
Right.
I think anybody in your family who's older, interview them, ask them questions, ask them about their lives, ask them about, how things are different now compared to then, or what are they most surprised about? I can remember as a child having one phone in the house that was in the hallway by the kitchen. There was no privacy if you wanted to talk on the phone, right? There was the one phone. I then remember when you had two phones in the house, one in the kitchen and one in your parents' bedroom. Ooh,
Right.
that was like the big time, right? Then all of a sudden there was this thing called call waiting, right? Now there are cell phones. And I remember the first cell phones in those big bags, right? That you had the battery lasted maybe an hour or two. The only reason I know that is because when Juliet was first pregnant, I was like the most neurotic father to be, and I didn't want her to be anywhere she couldn't reach me and find us or whatever. So we got one of those bags. But compare that to these little mini computers we walk around in our hands now, right? It's amazing.
Yeah. So really document everything. Document
Everything, because life changes so quickly.
Right.
And there are perspectives that would be lost otherwise, from somebody who went from not having a telephone in their house to walking around with a cell phone in their pocket.
Right.
Those people will soon be gone.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
All right. You forgot the what is it? The tape recorder that you hooked up to the phone, leave a message to. That was a big invention at the time.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. After the phone, the one phone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where you have the music playing. Hey, this is Jice. Leave a message. Yeah. But the next question for you, Walter. What do you hope your children and future generations will understand about Mama Ceal and her roots throughout the book?
I hope my children appreciate that they come from very strong stock.
Yeah.
Very good.
And I think that's true. Every Black person in this country who is a descendant of slaves or enslaved people comes from strong stock.
Right.
And it's easy to lose sight of that because slavery was so horrendous and demoralizing and degrading and dehumanizing. But only the strongest of those people survived. Now, some of those people had the presence of mind to say, I will not exist. And they took themselves over the boats into the sea because they wouldn't do it. And that is a form of strength, I think, in many respects. But those who were brought to this country and survived slavery and whose genes still course through us, they were really strong people. And they survived much worse than we are seeing and experiencing right now. And I think there is a way to harness that spirit by acknowledging them, celebrating them, calling their names, invoking their spirits to help us address the challenges that we have now. So I hope that my children will see that same resilience in themselves that I believe existed in her.
Great. So as we wrap this up, your baby, your third baby, I guess, This Leaves Me Okay,
Yes.
has been out in the world for closing in on 6 months. What's next? Are you picking up the pen? Any other writing projects? Are you still in pushing this? What's next for you on your writing journey?
So my first priority right now is still book promotion, right? And my publisher and my agent are saying, you know, it's a marathon, so you gotta stay out there and keep doing it.
Mhm.
But I am not opposed to writing another book. I don't have an idea yet. I would not have when I approached this, I presumed I'd write a book and be done, and that would be it.
Mhm.
And I'm now thinking, you know what? Maybe I would do this again. So we're entertaining thoughts and ideas about what another book could be.
Wonderful.
Very good.
Well, we're stay tuned. We thank you for your time and for sharing this. Quench crew, we've got a link for This Leaves Me Okay, where you can get it at that, probably local booksellers, the big box online. It can be at your house in a day or two. We highly recommend, please go support Walter. Purchase this book. It is an excellent, excellent read about, family history. You will see yourself in it. And I know I did. Jice is seeing his family in it. And we are really appreciative. So Quench crew, please share this video. We want to spread the word about our channel and about Walter and the book. And definitely subscribe. Anything else, Jice?
That's it. This has been wonderful. Thank you for your time, Walter. We really
Thank you
appreciate
guys
it.
so much for having me. This has been wonderful.
All right, Quench
Take,
crew. We'll see you on the next video.
take care.
Bye-bye.